What expectation should we have on Matias Maccelli this season? And is there a trade in the works involving the Toronto Maple Leafs? We'll get to all that more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's happening, pal? How we feeling on a Tuesday?
Feeling pretty good. Jays, another big win.
Dude, 9 in a row for the Blue Jays. I think they just tied a record for most wins before the All-Star break, a new team record.
Franchise record.
Yeah. And they still have, 5 games to go to break that record? And they play 2 more against the White Sox and then a 3-game set against the Athletics. I might go and play some change on FanDuel over the next couple of days of them getting some money line victories because I think they break that record. The Jays are rolling right now, and the vibes are good. And you know what? I've been workshopping something, actually. It's kind of a Jays-Leafs crossover. This might be the time to actually bring it to fruition. Now that you got me going with the Blue Jays. I've been talking about this with you for, a couple of weeks, and I haven't actually brought it to the pod yet because I was still waiting to see if it was real. So let me throw something out you here. The Toronto Maple Leafs want to change the DNA of the group, right? They want to change the DNA of the group. And when we first heard about this, and we heard those words come out of Brad Treliving's mouth, we all assumed, okay, we're going to see some big changes. There's going to be some turnover, and he's going to bring in some external players that are going to have to come in and be difference makers and change up the spine of this group. And the easy thing to think was, all right, both Tavares and Marner, their contracts are up. With them out, that should open up a lot of space for them to bring in new players. Okay, Marner went, Tavares didn't. And now we're kind of having that conversation. When you look at the Maple Leafs today as constructed in comparison to the day that the season ended when they lost in Game 7, embarrassingly, to the Florida Panthers, yes, they're missing one of their best players in Mitch Marner, but outside of that, the DNA of the group isn't all that different, right? They still have most of their roster intact. They have both of their starting goaltenders. They're going to come back with the exact same blue line unless other moves are made. But as of now, going to come back with the exact same blue line. And they still are going to have, Matthew Nyes. They're going to have Matthews, Tavares, Nylander, Max Domi's in the mix. Like they're still the minutia of the team is very similar to what it was a year ago. So how can they possibly have changed the DNA? And this is a question that we've kind of been pondering ourselves inside of our brains the last few weeks. And I think what we're seeing happen with the Toronto Blue Jays is kind of making me believe that it doesn't take external help to make it happen. You just need the guys who are supposed to perform actually perform and then have some internal improvement from within. You look at what the Jays are doing, they've completely changed the DNA of this group. Like but it's not by changing the personnel. The personnel is very similar to what it's been, right? It's Vladdy, it's Bo, it's Springer, it's Alejandro Kirk, who's been a mainstay on this team for a while, right? It's Barrios, it's Gossman. Like, these guys have been mainstays with this team for years, over the last couple of seasons where this team seemed very lost.
Yep.
But all of a sudden, it seems like there's been some sort of DNA change, an identity overhaul within the group, and they've somehow turned the franchise around. And it's not like it took external help to do it. It happened from within. And they changed the DNA of this group, and now they're just playing ball. They're playing ball. They're happy. They're showing up to the ballpark each and every day, and they're winning games. And they're finding ways to win, whether it's good pitching one night, the offense another, great defense one other night. They're finding aspects. They're all kind of coming together on different nights, picking each other up, and it's culminating into quite the watch. This team's become very likable, Dave, and it wasn't external. It wasn't an external DNA change. It happened pretty well internally. Could the Leafs maybe take a page out of the Jays playbook and internally improve this group and improve and change the DNA and have this type of success moving forward? Is that possible, Dave? Or is that a stretch?
I don't think it's a complete stretch, because in a way it's also how players carry themselves, right? How they take care of them. Like, yeah, the Jays got a new hitting coach, so that's one, I guess, change that usually can benefit a team, is when you bring in a new perspective in that regard. But yeah, all the improvements have come internally. You talk about guys like Addison Barger, who've been playing pretty well, Ernie Clement. Like, these are all internal, workings together. And look, you hear Brad Shilliving talk about it. He said, I think he thinks that people kind of they took that change the DNA and ran it as if the whole team was going to get changed. And he's like,
Right.
No, it's about how the group is going to come together and do things differently. That's where he really was bringing it up.
And it's a between the ears thing for this group, right? And I think that's where you look at how this Blue Jays team, like their approach at the plate is night and day different than the way it was a year ago. And that's kind of where you're looking and you're thinking to yourself, they improved themselves. Like the players themselves bought into the system, and they were able to change the mindset inside. They didn't go out and get a Juan Soto or a Shohei Ohtani to do this. It's the guys who were there, right? Whether they were there in the minor leagues or they were there on that roster. Like, the one guy who the Jays actually went out and bought was Anthony Santander. He's done nothing for this team offensively. It's all been guys who have been with this team or with the organization at the very least for a couple of years. And collectively, they've just somehow changed the DNA of the group, and they're out there and they're just playing good ball. If the Maple Leafs, is it possible for them to kind of, mirror that on the ice where they can all come together and you get, like the Addison Bargers of the world or the Ernie Clements of the world, like that would mean, like Bobby McMahon could be that guy where he kind of comes out of nowhere and has a 20-goal season. Like, that would be like the Ernie Clement, where it's like, you've been there for a couple of years. Now it's time for you to really kind of come through and do something great with this team. Max Domi would be another one of those players who could do that, right? And if you're thinking of, okay, well, who could be that Addison Barger who's literally come out of nowhere, wasn't on your, radar to start the season, but a rookie who's starting to pick it up. I mean, that could possibly be like Easton Cowan, who comes in and gives his team a bit of a jolt if he can play the game the right way, right? So I think that there's some parallels there. It's a work in progress. It's a work in progress of a theory. But I think that, if you're the Leafs, you can look at what's happening in Toronto with the Blue Jays right in your own town and be like, hey, it's possible. It's possible to change the DNA of a group, keeping the same core intact, or a very, similar version of the core intact, and just make them change what's going on between the ears to find that level of success that's needed. And it's working in with the Blue Jays organization. Hopefully this year, maybe we can see the same type of success with the Maple Leafs.
And again, Craig Berube got a whole year to kind of see and observe.
Yeah.
And he probably has told us a couple of players things that they need to work on, right? He's that kind of fresh perspective in all of this, right? Because it's a similar result to what we've seen before, but now you get a coach who can look at it from a different lens, right? I think, like, when you hear Treliving, especially Brad Treliving talk, Like, he seems to really get it. He seems to really get where this team needs to find that improvement. And usually the general managers that don't feel the need to go above and beyond and make the knee-jerk reactionary moves, it tends to usually pay off in a lot of ways. So I'm hoping that's why you kind of hope, right? If you've got good players, find a way to get the most out of those good players, right? Because as we're finding out, when you let a Mitch Marner go, not really easy to replace a Mitch Marner, right?
No.
When we're talking about what we want to be playing, the player we want to be playing with Austin Matthews, guess what, guys? Sounds quite a lot like Mitch Marner.
Yeah, it would be nice to try and find
Mitch Marner, but the Mitch
Marner
Marner that wants to play in Toronto, not wants to go and leave.
Right. A Marner-like player, someone who has the similar skill set. And could that player be with the team? And we don't know it yet. Perhaps. There's a guy who spoke with the media today that believes he might be able to fill in that role, Matias Maccelli. Why don't we come back, Dave, and let's chat about what we learned from Matias Maccelli when he spoke with the Maple Leafs media and potentially what his role could be moving forward with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it's not Maccelli. Who else? Who else? Is there a trade in the works to land that next guy? And who do the Leafs have to offer? That's coming up next here in the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as always. And Matias Maccelli, who was acquired by the Maple Leafs ahead of the NHL draft, would have been less than 2 weeks ago, I guess, since that deal went down. So he's been a Maple Leaf for less than 2 weeks. But today was the first time that Toronto media got a chance to catch up and speak to Maccelli, get his thoughts on what went wrong last year in Utah. My bad. That's a dollar in the swear jar. What went wrong in Utah last year? Why he expects for this season to be much better, and what does he expect of himself, and how excited is he to be here in Toronto? So, he answered all of those questions and more. Dave, after listening to what Maccelli had to say, what stood out to you?
I mean, obviously, just hearing about his desire to kind of put that last year behind him, he feels like, last year, not a good year for himself. But he also felt like the role changed. And because the role changed, he wasn't exactly afforded the opportunity to be the best version of himself. So, obviously, when you go from having, I think, 67 points a couple years ago to then
60,
you have.
Was it that many?
I think it was 67, 17 goals and 40 assists 2 years ago.
57, pal.
57. Oh, sorry. Bad math on my part. That's why I didn't give. Actually, I have to correct this person's article, so I have to send them a note saying you got it wrong.
Oh, was that on SN?
Potentially. So I shall make that. I shall make that change before more people get it wrong. But last year he only averaged like 13, just under 14 minutes a game.
Yeah.
I think a few years ago, he's over 16 minutes a game, which doesn't sound like a whole lot of difference for offensive players. It usually does, right? Probably, and he wasn't playing on the top power play unit.
Yeah.
And also, Utah is a team that's improving and it's getting better players, but the talent discrepancy between Utah and Toronto, there is a big discrepancy. Right, yes. They don't have an Austin Matthews. They don't have a John Tavares. They don't have a William Nylander. When you play like with players like that, like we saw, look at what Michael Bunting did the first year he was in Toronto, and look at where he is now. He is not the same player, right? So in some ways, when you get into the right situations, that's where you can envision yourself being better. But the big question was, does he see himself playing with Austin Matthews? And I mean, if anybody asked me the question of would I like to play with Austin Matthews, I'd be like, heck no, I don't want to be with that. Like, really? Yes, of course you're going to want to play with Austin Matthews. Like, a lot of players would like to play with Austin Matthews. I wish more players would want to play with Austin Matthews so they can come to Toronto. But apparently that hasn't been the case sometimes, but
No.
we digress. But, like, we know his best attribute is his passing.
Correct.
What does Austin Matthews do? He scores goals.
Yes.
What does he need? Somebody that can get him the puck. So that's kind of where the things are supposed to come together.
Right. And Maccelli, if they don't make an addition between now and the start of the season, I would imagine Maccelli starts with Matthews and Nyes. And he does become that Marner-esque replacement, whereas, Marner was the vision. He was the guy who made the passes, right? He was the playmaker of his lines, of that line specifically. And Maccelli's done that his entire career as well. Like when he was asked, like, who do you feel he played best with? The two names he mentioned was Nick Bukestad and Lawson Krause. Those are big, beefy players. And I think it's because those are guys who just went to the net, right? Maccelli was able to kind of do what he could do on the perimeter, and he was able to sift pucks through and find those two in and around the goal, and they were able to put the puck in the back of the net. Well, Matthew Nyes and Austin Matthews kind of do the similar things here. So I think that he's a good option if they don't have anyone else. I still think that they're going to try and make more of an upgrade, and maybe Maccelli won't be that number one option at the start of camp. I think right now he is, but by the start of camp, I think there'll be another player in there that potentially, will get the first crack on Matthews' wing. But it could be worse. I think it could be worse than a Matias Maccelli. I still think that he's, he can be a good player. As you mentioned, he had 40 assists last year, like in the 23-24 season. 40 assists, that's nothing to snuff at. 29 of them came at even strength. So it's not as though he just relied on power play cookies throughout his entire tenure while he was in Arizona/Utah. He could play at 5-on-5. He had pretty good 5-on-5 numbers, realistically. So, I think that this is definitely a player that it's a good buy low bet, and I think that he'll have an opportunity to play alongside one of Matthews or William Nylander. Either way, the way that he will have the ability to move the puck and to make plays, the Leafs. They got players on both lines in the top six that could use a Matias Maccelli-like player that can facilitate the puck. So wherever he ends up being, whether it's on the second line beside Tavares and Nylander or on the first line beside Nyes and Matthews, I think he's going to be a serviceable player and a useful piece. And he wanted to be here. He wants to be here. He apparently told his agent when he had asked for a trade out, he said, I'd like to get to Toronto if possible. So he wanted to come here. He clearly wants to be in this market, be on this team, and hopefully he can bounce back after a poor year last season. Only played 55 games. There was injury, but then also the time on ice dropped drastically, like almost 3 minutes less per game on ice. Lost a bunch of time on the power play, dropped from the top six down to the fourth line for a majority of the back half of the season. So it limited him to just 18 points, and even the shooting percentage took a massive dip. Like 2 years ago, 18% shooting. Last year, 11%. This year, down to just 9% shooting. So overall, wasn't a good year for Matias Maccelli, but he's still very young. Very young, still only just 24 years old. He'll be 25 around when the season starts, October 14th. He's a guy who I believe is a good buy low bet for the Maple Leafs, and I think he'll fit somewhere within that top six, whether it is on the top line or on the second line. But I do like the play there, and it sounds like he is excited to be here in Toronto, which you obviously really like to hear as well. If it's not Matias Maccelli on the top line, I believe it's because they've made a trade and because they've brought in somebody with a bit more of a pedigree playing in the top six and playing with top players. Who could those players be, and what type of trade would the Leafs need to pull off to make that happen? We'll chat about that next on the Locked On Leafs podcast. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Just find us, the Locked On Leafs podcast, also up on YouTube as well. So, Dave, I believe that the Maple Leafs are working the phones pretty hard to make a trade. As nice as the player as Matias Maccelli is, I still do believe, as I mentioned before, that they would like to have more of an upgrade. Like, to me, Maccelli is more an upgrade on, utilizing Max Domi in the top six or Pontus Holmberg in the top six. He's not the Marner replacement. No. Are there any players out there that stick out to you as potential Marner replacements, though?
No one that comes to my head right away. Like, I've been trying to figure out, like, who could the Leafs be trying to trade for? Like, is it Jordan Kyrou? Like, someone brought up that name. Actually, it was asked in the Discord. That's where it was. And I'm like, I think Jordan Kyrou would want to stay away from Craig Berube after what happened in St. Louis.
Like, those two did not have a good ending in St. Louis. So that's a name that I think is probably crossed off the list. Talented player, don't get me wrong. I think he's a very talented player. I think he could go to pretty well any other team would be happy to have Jordan Kyrou on their squad. Not sure either the coach or the player want that one to happen. I mean, the name that I've always kind of liked as a fit, and it's becoming increasingly more obvious that it could be like almost a match made in heaven if the two GMs could make it work and bury the hatchet and make a deal. Bryan Rust from the Pittsburgh Penguins to me would be a perfect player next to Austin Matthews and Matthew Nyes. He's someone who's a playoff performer. He's won a couple cups, and he has that ability to play with top players. He's been on the line with Sidney Crosby for years, so he has that ability to elevate his game when he's playing with people with immense skill, clearly. So, and he's a guy who's got term on his deal, 3 more years left at $5 million per, and I think that he's coming off a solid season, 33 goals this past year. So if he can give you 30 goals and be a responsible two-way player, just like Mitch Marner was, I think that that's the kind of guy that I'd be looking for if I were the Toronto Maple Leafs. Bryan Rust is kind of at the top of my trade want list, I suppose. But the question is, is Kyle Dubas willing to do business with the Toronto Maple Leafs yet on a star player like that? They did a deal at the deadline. They acquired Connor Dewar and Connor Timmins for a 5th-round pick, minor deal. But is he willing to deal away, one of the pillars of the Penguins organization right now in Bryan Rust? And you have to ask yourself, like, okay, if you're giving, you got to get, or if you're getting, you got to give. Do the Maple Leafs have the assets to make a deal like this? That's the question that I think we have to ask ourselves. And like, Dave, who are the trade assets or the tradable pieces that the Maple Leafs have right now, in your opinion? When you look at this roster, like, who would you entertain moving out?
Okay, well, it's not even who I would entertain. I already know who the number one target's going to be for Kyle Dubas. It's going to be Easton Cowan.
It's going to be Easton Cowan, correct. It is going to be, it for sure is going to be him.
And if it's not, then there's something wrong with Kyle Dubas, clearly. Because
well, here's what I'll say about Easton Cowan. I will say this. Cowan was drafted by Wes Clark, who is now an AGM out in Pittsburgh. So, like, there is a Cowan fanboy in that Pittsburgh organization right now who's pretty high up. Dubas's right-hand man, him and Jason Spezza. It would make a lot of sense for him to want to bring him into the Pittsburgh organization. I'm curious though, like, is Cowan enough? Like, would that be a 1-for-1 deal? Would that be enough, like, on both sides? Like, is that all it would take? Would it be a Cowan for Rust 1-for-1, or would there have to be some additions on each side, you think?
I think the Penguins would probably ask for one more piece.
Okay.
Whether it's a pick or a player.
I think you're right. And here's the player that I have kind of pinpointed as a possibility. I think it kind of kills two birds with one stone. I think there's a gluttony of, like, bottom six pieces on this Maple Leafs team. We already know. We had heard through the grapevine that Elliot Friedman was reporting that before they make any addition, they do want to make some subtractions from that group of bottom six forwards. But one of the players that I'm looking at that I don't necessarily think has a role, and by bringing in Matias Maccelli, really makes him kind of redundant, who could still have some value out there for a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins. Max Domi is the name that I'm thinking of. Like, Easton Cowan and Max Domi, those two as a pairing together, could that be enough to go out and get yourself a Bryan Rust for the Maple Leafs? Like, is that the trade package that could get that done?
I wonder if it can. So that makes me think that it's possible. Because, like, if you're the Leafs, you got to stop trading draft picks. And if I'm the Leafs, like, look,
Brian have draft picks to trade anyway.
Well, that's true, but it's just like at some point you got to look at some of your internal assets that you already have. Easton Cowan is the best one you have.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it should be enough to do a deal like that, because at least Pittsburgh's not in full rebuild mode. They're in retool. So, like, you get a young player like Easton Cowan that's going to he's a little further ahead, right, than what a draft pick would be. So, like, that should be an enticing piece enough. And, like, as you said, Max Domi still has some value. And frankly, if you put a Max Domi even if you, let's say, put him with Crosby, Sidney Crosby's made some very ordinary players look pretty good. I don't think that'd be a tough sell for Max Domi to go to Pittsburgh, right? I don't know, because I don't know what the trade protection Pittsburgh.
Yeah, well, he's got that modified no trade clause. So he does have a 13-team no trade list. Whether or not Pittsburgh's on that, I suppose, remains to be seen. But it's like, hey, you don't really have a spot on this roster here in Toronto. And if you do, it's going to be in the bottom six. You might be able to compete for a top six role in a rebuilding Pittsburgh squad, but you'll get to play with one of Sidney Crosby or Geno Malkin. I think that's a decent selling point. Who would you rather play with, Dave? Crosby, Malkin, or like Nick Waugh or David Kampf? Where would you rather play? It's pretty simple and easy for me.
Yep, no, pretty much. And if I'm also, like, looking at this, especially if you're like Kyle Dubas made it a point when he traded Jake Gensel, did not get a first round pick back. Like, remember? He got Michael Bunting and like a second round pick.
Yeah, that was a terrible trade.
It was a terrible trade.
And I think at the time it was more of a team that was in a retool.
Yep.
Now I think they're more in rebuild mode. But that being said, like, they could easily flip Domi at some point.
Exactly,
like, if he can rebuild his value playing in the top six in Pittsburgh and, score double-digit goals for the first time in 3 years, because 2 years in Toronto, he's got 9 and 8 goals. It's not a whole lot. It's not great. Now he's got 47 points and 33 points, so he's getting assists at the very least. But I just don't see him having an elevated role this year. But I think he could have that in Pittsburgh. And 375 is not a crazy number for a Max Domi, but if he can go there, play in the top 6, put up some points, maybe get some power play time, I think that he can put up some numbers where a team could come calling at the deadline and be willing to give up, a second round pick maybe for Max Domi. But that doesn't happen right now for Toronto. I don't think he gets that with the Maple Leafs after the last couple of years that he had. But if he proves that he can play in an elevated role somewhere else, perhaps another team will make that trade. So I think that it's a worthwhile gamble for Pittsburgh, but at the same time, I think that obviously Easton Cowan is the belle of the ball in that trade. If you're the Penguins, like Domi's a nice little sweetener, but you're hoping that you're picking up Easton Cowan, who can be a stud for you down the road. And when Crosby and Malkin hang it up, Easton Cowan is maybe the next great Penguin, not in that same ilk. I'm not saying he will be those players, but he'll be considered one of the better players on your team if he develops the way that they think he might be able to, is all I'm saying. So that to me is almost like a trade that I would be calling, trying to see if I can make that work out. I feel like it's a fair deal on both sides. Easton Cowan and Max Domi for Bryan Rust. Both teams, I think, can benefit from a trade like that, both short-term and long-term. So that to me is almost like the perfect trade that's available for the Maple Leafs right now.
I think so too. And I know some people may feel like trading Easton Cowan should be a no. If you're getting somebody like Bryan Rust who makes your team better right away, we know he could play top 6. We know he could play on a contending team. And you're not getting him for 1 year. He's got term on his deal, which I've been calling for these types of trades. If you're going to trade one of your top prospects, trade it for something that's going to be around for a few more years. So you're not feeling like you've been gypped in a way, right? That, we just traded all these pieces and we didn't know they're gone, right? We didn't really see much of the return because, the players that we traded for left after 1 year. Right. Like Jake McCabe is one of those deals that actually looks a little better on paper for what you gave up because he's still here.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, you've got 3 more years left of Bryan Rust if you can make that deal come through. So that to me is the best trade available for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Maybe tomorrow you can come up with one outside of Rust. Maybe it's a different trade package for a different player. Like let's say Kyle Dubas says, "No, Brad, I'm not willing to work with you. Screw you, screw Toronto. All right, what's the next phone call Brad Treliving should make?" That's your task for tomorrow's podcast, Dave.
I have homework. God darn it!
You got homework. You got homework.
Man, you're giving me homework.
You got homework, buddy. It's not the summer for us.
No,
all right. We go all the way through, pal. We go all the way through for the great listeners of the Locked On Leafs podcast. Really quickly before we go, there's some pretty big news in the college hockey world, junior hockey. Gavin McKenna, who is the next great one, I guess. He was an exceptional status player in the WHL a couple years ago, and he just absolutely tore it up this season in the WHL. 129 points in 56 games. Followed that up with a 38-point effort through 16 playoff games in the WHL, winning the WHL championship, and add another 6 points in 4 games at the Memorial Cup. Finished as finalists to Easton Cowan's London Knights. He's leaving the CHL. He's leaving the WHL and heading south. Sounds like he is going to be signing with the Penn State Nittany Lions, Dave.
Yeah.
This is interesting news. Interesting, unprecedented news where you have a CHL star electing in his draft year, sayonara, I'm going down south.
It's crazy in 2 ways. One, he is the best. This guy was a projected number 1 pick like a couple years ago. Like people said 2026, look out for Gavin McKenna.
Yeah.
And he's not even going to one of the quote unquote powerhouses of the NCAA. Like Penn State's a good team. They were in the Frozen Four, but they're not a Michigan. They're not Boston, Boston College, Boston
Right.
University, or even Michigan, Minnesota. He won at Penn State.
Yeah.
And I heard a couple reasons for that. One, the Pagula family have fed in a lot of money to Penn State. So there's a bit of the NIL, there's a little bit of incentive
that
to
makes
make
sense.
a little bit of money there. Like people
But
like, why Penn State?
Oh, Pagulas, though.
Yeah.
The Pagulas.
Yeah.
So if you're Buffalo, hang on. Should Buffalo just full on tankathon this year?
I mean, they don't have to try that hard sometimes.
You're right. But like, they got some nice pieces. Like, just trade them all out. Do your best
for
to
Gavin
get that
McKenna,
number 1 pick.
I would consider that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, because Michigan State was like right there at the end too. Like it's been reported for like a while that it was like Penn State was in the lead, Michigan State was making a push as well.
Yeah.
So, but this is so interesting because it's not just Gavin McKenna that did this. His teammate Caden Lindstrom is going to Michigan State.
Yeah.
There's so many top.
We live in
players.
A different world now.
Yep,
Dave. We live in a different world now, Dave. And this is kind of what. This is the result of NIL and the result of being able to pay players, because for the longest time, if you played in the Canadian Hockey League, in the OHL, the WHL, or the QMJHL, you were considered an amateur player, but you were somewhat paid. You got a little something, a little kickback, and you were ineligible to play college if you played in the CHL. That's no longer the case now with NIL coming into it. That completely negates that issue that players had. And now they're very freely, when they enter into their collegiate years, to go and play wherever they want in the States if they want to. So this is a situation where Gavin McKenna, he's a late birthday. He's an 07. So in his draft year, very much the same as what Austin Matthews did when he decided to go play in Europe for his draft season, because he was also a late birthday. He graduated at 17, but was not old enough by the time of the draft to go in that draft year, had to wait the following season. And that's where McKenna finds himself. He's a December birthday. So we're not going to see every year where the number 1 pick is going to, go south and go play in the States. It's just a real kind of interesting situation where he happens to be a late birthday and he graduated high school in his, the year prior to being drafted, and is eligible to go to university in his draft year. Typically, you're in your senior year of high school in your draft year. But because of the late birthday, this is kind of where we find ourselves. So it's kind of just a perfect storm that's allowed this to happen. But I do think that this is an interesting situation where now I feel like this opens the floodgates for a lot of players where, okay, if I don't latch on to an NHL team and I want to, instead of going back to junior for like a second season, almost like what Easton Cowan ended up doing, maybe now you see these 19, 20-year-olds in their draft +1, +2 years deciding, I'll just go play the year in college. And the CHL, they should be concerned. They should be concerned about this stuff. They really, really should be.
They should be a bit concerned about, I would say more so the star players, like the big attractions. Mm-hmm. It may open up opportunities for other players that maybe couldn't get to the CHL and to get those opportunities, but it's going to hurt.
You're diluting your stars.
Yes, that's it, right? You're missing out on your. They're gonna have. This is something where the CHL is going to have to find a way to
kind of compete.
Yeah, exactly, right. Obviously, there's the reputation of the league as one of the top junior leagues in the world, but it's going to have to.
But that is even that, like the reputation of what the CHL offers compared to what the NCAA over the last 10 years, like that gap is now here. Like it's pretty on even playing field compared to where it used to be. And that's now you can get paid to play in the NCAA. That's like the competition is even.
Oh yeah.
You get paid way more now in the NCAA than you do in the CHL. You're going to see a lot more players taking their talents down south once they're of university or college age. So there's not going to be a lot of star overagers in the
Yeah,
CHL.
I guess the only saving grace is maybe you'll got a few players playing in their 16, 17 year, and then they'll go. But it's not at that point. Some of those players are not even hit their peaks yet, and they're going to be playing their best hockey in the NCAA.
Yeah, real interesting stuff. All right, that's going to do it for us here today in the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. On tomorrow's show, Dave's going to give us his Plan B trade package if Kyle Dubas hangs up the phone. Who else could be available, and what could that package potentially look like? So be sure to come back tomorrow for another episode. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.